Alright everybody, what is going on? This is the Art Programmer and today we are going to discuss Compose. So let's get started. Jetpack Compose is a toolkit for building Android UI. It combines a reactive programming model with the ease of use of the Kotlin language. Jetpack Compose is based upon a declarative UI pattern, which means that we describe our UI by calling some functions on the go. Normally in Android, we declare our UI in XML, which is then converted to Java code by Android's framework. But our applications are usually reactive, which means that based on data, some components of our UI changes. So it means that first, we are creating the view and then mutating it via getters and setters. This implies that the views have a state of their own, and every time we update the view, we are changing its state. In the case of Compose, the problem of views having their own state is eliminated. So what is Jetpack Compose? Compose is a fully compatible Jetpack widget built entirely in Kotlin. They are not views. In fact, they are more basic and smaller modules that can be used to build the skeleton of our UI. Compose works by defining our UI using declarative functions, which are annotated with @composable. So we define a UI tree by these composable functions and the rest is handled by the Compose compiler. Now keep in mind that Compose is still in pre-alpha stage and API surfaces are likely to change, so it should not be used in production. So enough with the theory now, let's practice Jetpack Compose. In this tutorial, we'll make the Championgram application. As you can see here, we have a scrolling list of superheroes and villains. On top, there is a horizontal scrolling list of stories. When we tap on it, the posted photo is shown. We head back by tapping on this button and when we tap on the superhero post, a new screen opens up with details of that superhero or villain. We have the option to mark our favorite champion and there is a share button that will share the Wikipedia link of that champion. Of course, all these are just UI. There is no persistent data storage, no networking. The data shown is hard-coded. It is just bare-bone UI and our main focus here is Compose. So before we dive into the coding part, make sure you are using the Canary version of Android Studio because it is the only version that supports Compose. The link will be given in description. Second thing is to make sure to clone the repository given in the description to quickly set up the project. Now let's get started. So first of all, take a look at the build.gradle file of the app module. As you can see here, all the dependencies related to Compose are added. Second thing is to enable the Compose build features. Now as you can see in the project structure, there are two directories already added. The first one is data that contains data Kotlin file. Second is the model which contains champion Kotlin file. So first, take a look at our champion model file. As you can see, it contains a champion data class with some properties. After that, there is another data class story, which is annotated with @model. This allows this data class to be observable. This means that any composable function which will be using this story data class will automatically get updated whenever there is any change in the data. The whole UI hierarchy doesn't get recreated, but only those components which use the model data get recreated with updated values. At last, we have this enum class with two values. We will use this class later in this tutorial. Next, take a look at this data Kotlin file. This file contains some predefined instances of our data class which will be used by the UI. Anyway, it is not much of a concern. Feel free to explore it yourself. Now, open the main activity file and take a look. The first big thing is this greeting function. As you can see, it is annotated with @composable. Functions that are annotated with @composable can only be called from the scope of other composable functions. Okay, so the greeting function takes a string parameter and calls this text function. Text is a composable function provided by the Compose library. This function is used to declare a text element which is equivalent to the text view in XML. So we are passing in our string to the text function. Next, we have this default preview function which is annotated with @composable as well as @preview. This annotation allows the function to be previewable alongside the code. Just head over to the Split tab or Design tab to see it. You might have to refresh the build to see it. One thing worth mentioning here is that functions annotated with preview cannot have any parameters. Next, we are calling this greeting function inside our main activities on create function. We usually do a set content view, but instead we are calling this set content inline function, which accepts a child composable and sets to the root view of the activity. This material theme is also a composable function that has material design specification of typography, colors, etc. Now you can go ahead and run the application and you will only see Hello Android in your activity. Now we will create the UI of our Championgram application using Compose. So Championgram will have three main screens. The first one is the home screen, which will have both profiles as well as stories in scrolling lists. Second is the story screen, and third is the profile screen. So first, right click and create a new directory and name it UI, as you can see I have done here. Next, create a Kotlin file and name it Championgram app, as you can see here. This will act as the main container of our app. We will come back to this in a while. Next, right click and create a Kotlin file and name it navigation. This class will be responsible for in-app navigation. Third, create a Kotlin file and name it themes. This file will contain the global theme of our application. Now, open themes and create a color palette object. The color palette class is used to define the complete color definition of the theme. As you can see, I already have them defined here, such as primary, which is the primary color of our application. You may already be familiar with all these color terminologies. Next, we have primary variant, which is the primary dark color from the XML themes, which is used for the status bar. Next, we have on primary, which is used for the items which will be drawn above the primary color, like text, etc. Next is secondary color, which stands for the accent color, the color which is used for floating action buttons, etc. Next is on secondary, which is the color for objects above secondary color. Next is background color, which is used for default background color. On background, which is self-explanatory. Next is surface color, which is used for colors of surfaces for cards, etc. After that, on surface, which is again self-explanatory. The second last is error color, which will be used for any error, and last is on error, which is again self-explanatory. So that's all for the themes file. If your app needs to have a dark theme, that can be defined here as well. Next, open the navigation file. First, create a sealed class screen. A sealed class is like enum class, but a subclass of a sealed class can have multiple instances that can contain state. The first element of the sealed class is an object home. The second subclass is a data class profile with a property champion ID. The third subclass is another data class story with property story ID. This sealed class will be used for state navigation of the application. After that, we have a model object which represents the current screen of the application. As you can see, it is annotated with @model, which means any changes made here will automatically reflect back in the UI. So anyway, we have a var inside the navigation object which holds the current screen. The default value for it is the screen.home. Finally, we have a function that will be used to navigate between screen states. As you can see, we take a destination screen as a parameter and set the current screen to it. So that's it for the navigation file. Next, we look at the Championgram app, which is the main container of our application. First, create a composable function, main screen. As the name suggests, this will act as the main screen of our application. So the first element is this crossfade. This composable function is used to transform between two layouts with a crossfade animation. It takes two parameters. First one is the current and the second is the child. For the current, we are passing the default current screen, which is the home screen. For the child, we are passing in a lambda, which first checks the screen states and navigate accordingly. So when the screen is screen.home, we show the home screen. Next, we will have screens for the story and profile. We will do this later in this tutorial after creating respective screens. Another composable function here is the championgram map function. The first element of this function is the material theme composable, to which we are passing in our custom color palette, which we created earlier. Next, we are calling the main screen composable, which we created now, as its child. So that's it for this file. We'll come back to this later for further navigation related adjustments. Next, right click under UI directory and create another directory called home. This directory will contain all the files of the home screen of our application. So let's create some files one by one, as you can see here. First, create a file home screen, then home story, and last home champion card. Open the home story file. This file will contain the composable function for the story items, which will be shown at the top of the home screen in a horizontal scrolling list. This is what we want to create. So create a composable function and name it home story. It takes a story object as a parameter. The first thing we are doing is to get the image instance that is associated with the story. So we have this image resource, to which we are passing in the image ID we want to use. For now, let's say that this plus unary operator is used to resolve the resource we want. Next, we are creating a chain of composable functions to get our desired UI. First is this ripple function, which creates a ripple effect for its child elements. Under ripple, we have a clickable composable, which makes its child element clickable. The clickable function is taking two lambdas. The first one is onClick, which will be called when this UI element is tapped or clicked. We want to navigate to the respective story screen and change the status of the story to seen when it is tapped. So we will look at the navigation part later. For now, let's just change the status to seen. So we have the story.status is equal to story status.seen. A second lambda that this clickable composable takes is the child. We are using container composable. As the name suggests, this composable acts as a container for its child elements. The container provides many layout properties for its child, like padding, size, alignment, and size constraints. In our case, we are setting the size of the container to be 96 dp in width and 116 dp in height. Then we are putting a column composable. This will act as a vertical linear layout. We are passing in the expanded modifier, which will make this column occupy the sides of its parent. It is similar to match parent attribute in XML. Next, inside the column, first element is another container that will contain the thumbnail image. We set the size of this container to be 96 by 96 dp. Then we have this clip composable, which is used to clip its child according to a shape provided. In our case, we want the thumbnail to be in a circle shape, so we set the shape to a circle shape. And finally, we are calling the draw image composable, which is used to draw images similar to image view. Now we are checking the status of the story. If it is not seen or new, then we show a colored border around the thumbnail image, else it is not shown. We use draw border composable for that purpose. It is taking two properties. First is the shape. Since our thumbnail is in circular shape, we also set the border shape to be the same. Second, we are passing a border object with color and size. So the thumbnail part is done. Next, we will have the champion name displayed below the story thumbnail. So we create an alignment composable which aligns its child element to its parent element according to the alignment provided. In our case, we want the name to be shown at the bottom center of the container. So we have the alignment set to bottom center. Inside the alignment composable, first, we are checking if the status is seen or not. If it is not seen, then the text shown is in black color with full opacity, else the opacity is lower to make it look a little bit dull. We are using text composable for that purpose. As you can see, it has many properties. The first one is the text which is displayed. Second is style property. We are inheriting from the predefined material theme. The third is max lines property, which is used to set the maximum lines of text to be displayed if the text is large enough. You may be familiar with this one if you have worked with TextView and XML previously. Last is overflow property, which is used to define how the text overflow is shown. In our case, we show it by an ellipsis or 3 dots. As you can see here, we are lowering the opacity if the story status is not new, to make it look dull, which will give the impression of the story to be seen already. So that's it for this home story file. We have this preview composable, which will show how it looks. If I switch over to the split tab, we will see it. Next, open this home champion card file. We will create something like this. It has a picture, then 2 texts, all contained in a card. So first of all, create a composable function and name it home champion card. This function takes in a champion object as a parameter. We are getting an instance of the champion image via image resource, the same as we did with the story thumbnail image. Next, we are calling a card composable function. This composable is equivalent to the card view from XML. We are passing in some properties like shape, which is set to rounded corner, and a spacing modifier. This modifier will add the space on all sides of this card layout. These spaces will be external, so we can say that it acts as the layout margin from XML. Next, we have this ripple composable, which you have already seen in the previous file. Here we have set the bounded property of the ripple composable to true. This makes the ripple to originate from the touch location and clip to the shape of the layout, while unbounded ripple originates from the center of the layout and not the touch location. Then we have clickable composable, which you are already familiar with. Then we have column, and inside column we have container. You already know what these two composable do. One thing to mention here is the wraps keyword. Wraps can be used to chain modifiers. The left one always has a higher precedence than the right one. So in our case, we set the width to 0 dp, but we are calling the expanded width function, which stretches the target layout to occupy the full parent width. Since expanded width wraps size, so expanded width has a higher precedence. Inside this container, we are calling draw image. Then we are calling another column to vertically align those 2 texts. Again we are using this spacing modifier, but this time we are explicitly mentioning the sides for spacing. If not mentioned, the spacing happens on all 4 sides. Then we are calling text composable. The first one has the champion name, the second one has the champion's made up name. So that's pretty much it for this composable. Down here we have the preview. This is how it will look. Now it is time to create the home screen composable. So open the home screen file. This is what we want the home screen to look like. It has a top app bar, and below it is a horizontal scrolling list of stories, and below that it is a vertical scrolling list of champions. So first create a composable function and name it story section. This will be responsible for showing the list of stories in horizontal scrolling list. The first thing is this horizontal scroller composable, which allows its children to be scrolled horizontally. Inside horizontal scroller, we have a row composable. A row is like a linear layout with orientation set to horizontal. For each story, first we are creating a width spacer, which creates an empty space with a specified dp. Then we are calling home story composable, which we created earlier, and pass in the story. Next, create another composable function and name it champion section, which takes a list of champion as parameter. For every champion, we create a home champion card. At last, we have this small helper composable, which will be used to create a divider element. Finally, we create the home screen composable. First, we create a column to align each item vertically. The first item is top app bar, and for the title, we are aligning it to the center and then call the text. Then we are calling a vertical scroller composable, which makes its child elements to be vertically scrolled. We are passing in the flexible modifier. Flexible modifier works the same way as layout weight attribute works in XML. Flexible takes a flex value, according to which it expands the target layout. While creating the UI, first inflexible elements are calculated, then flexible elements are calculated. Inflexibles have a fixed size, while flexibles can expand or shrink. Then we are vertically aligning the story section, home divider and champion section one by one. The stories and champion list we are passing here is the same from the data file which we already have. So that's it for the home screen. This is how it will look. We can go ahead and run the application. We now have a complete working home screen, but when we tap or click, nothing happens. So our next step is to create a respective screen for story and champion profile and a way to navigate between them. To catch up till this part of the tutorial, you can check out the home branch from the GitHub repository given in the description. Okay, so next we will create the screen for respective stories. So when we tap on a story from the home screen, the respective story screen will show. Here's a quick look at how it will work and look like. We have a button on the top to navigate back. Then we have the champion name at the top center. The whole layout is occupied by the story image, and finally at the bottom there is text which says posted by respective champion name. So let's get started. First, right click under UI directory and create a new directory and name it story. Again, right click under the story directory and create two new Kotlin files. The first one is story screen and the second is story content. Now, first open up the story content file and create a new function, story content. This composable will be responsible for showing the story image and the bottom text. So, first of all, we are creating the image instance from the ID. Then we are using the draw image composable to draw the image. Then we have alignment composable to align the text to the bottom center. As you can see here, we are using the predefined material style for the text, but there is this copy function. So what is it? The copy function can be used to override some values from the predefined material style. In our case, we are overriding the color to white. So that's it for this file. Next, we need to edit the story screen file and create the top section of the story screen, which shows the back button and the name. But before we do that, let's create a new file under UI directory and name it vectors. As you can see, I have here. We will create some composable which will be needed by the story screen, and you will see that in a minute. So open vectors.kt and create a composable function and name it vector image. It will take three parameters. First is a modifier whose default value is none. Second is id, which will take the integer id of a vector drawable, and third is tint, which takes a color value whose default value is transparent. So first of all, we are getting the vector resource. Then we have this width density component. This function is used to convert dimensions between each other. So here it will be used to convert dp to pixels. Then we have a container to contain the vector image. As you can see, we have our output modifier wrapped around the default size of the vector. So in this way we can override any modifier if we want to. Finally, we are calling the draw vector to draw the vector image. Next, what we will do is to use this vector image as a clickable button. So create a new composable function and name it vector image button. As input parameters, we have a modifier, vector id, tint color, and finally a lambda function which will be called upon on click event. So as usual, we first have a ripple composable to create a ripple effect when tapped. Then we have a clickable function to actually make the image clickable. Then finally, we are calling our newly created composable function vector image, which will show the vector image of the provided ID. We are passing in the modifier, vector ID and tint color. So we have our vector image ready. Now, time to get back to the story screen. So open the story screen file and create a new composable function and name it story screen. This takes in an input parameter, story ID. This ID will be used to locate the respective story from our predefined list of stories. So that is the first thing we are doing. We are getting the story from the list of stories. Then we are calling the story content composable, which will show the story image as well as the bottom text. The only thing left are the top back button and the champion name at the top. So next thing we have is an alignment component that is set to align the child to top left. whose child is the vector image button that we created a while ago. As modifier, we pass in the spacing from all four sides. Then for the vector ID, we pass in the ID of the back button, which is already included in the project. For tint, we are passing the color white, and lastly for onClick, we are passing the navigate to function which we have created earlier in this tutorial to navigate back to the home screen. One thing worth mentioning here is that the Compose does not have any solid navigation system, and what we are doing is a temporary workaround. So when we tap the navigation back button, we will exit the app because our implementation of changing screen does not involve any stack mechanism to store all the previous screen. In fact, we are not actually changing the screen at all. We are just changing what is currently displayed. So, for now to navigate, we will have to use this vector image button at the top. Okay, next we have another alignment component. This time it is set to top center. This will be used to display the champion's made up name, as you can see here. So, that's all for the story screen. Next, we get back to the championgram app file and add a condition for the navigation of the story screen, as you can see I have done here. Next, open the home story file under home directory and add this navigate to function here, so that we can navigate to respective story screen by clicking on the story thumbnail from home screen. When you run the application, you will get something like this. After we tap on a story, we are shown the story. We can tap on the back button to get on the home screen. So we have added the story screen. Next and last thing to do is to add a screen for the champion profile, which will be shown when we tap on the champion card from the home screen. To catch up to this part of the tutorial, check out the story branch from the GitHub repository given in the description. Okay, now time to create the profile screen for our champions. So right click under your directory and create a new directory and name it champion. Now right click under champion directory and create two new files, champion content and champion screen, same as we did for the story screen. Here's a quick look at what we'll build. This is the champion profile screen. First, there is a top app bar, followed by an image of the champion, then some text, and at last, there is this bottom bar which has two buttons, for favorite marking and sharing. So, first of all, open the champion content file and create a composable function and name it champion content. Leave this as it is. Create another composable function and name it header image, which takes a champion object as a parameter, as you can see here. This function will be used to show the image of the champion. Inside this function, first we are getting the image instance from the ID. Then we are creating a container for the image. Width is set to expanded width, which will occupy its parent, and minimum height is set to 280 dp. Below this we have three more composable functions. First is made up name, second is header text key, and third is header text value. All these three functions are used to display texts in different styles. As you can see here, these are already explained, so I am skipping on these. At last we have this bullet text function, which will be used to display text in bullet points. As you can see, this takes a list of strings and traverses each string one by one and shows it in a formatted way. Now scroll back up and edit this champion content function. As you can see, it takes two parameters. The first one is the modifier and the second one is the champion. Now, the first component is a vertical scroller because the contents might be out of bounds vertically, so we need it to be scrollable to view the whole content. It has a column to vertically align the children. The first child is header image. Then we have another column to vertically align the texts. So inside the child column, first we have a height spacer to insert a vertical space. Then we have made up name composable to display the champion's made up name. The same is done with other texts, as you can see here. We have row to place the key value text horizontally. So we are displaying these things in the sequence. First is champion's real name, second is their place of origin, and last is their list of abilities, which is shown in bullet points. So our champion content composable is completed. Next, we will edit our champion screen, but before we get to that, let's create a new Kotlin file under your directory and name it bookmark. If you remember, Our champion screen has a favorite button at the bottom, and this bookmark will allow us to create such buttons. So open the bookmark file and first create a composable function and name it bookmark button. It will take 3 parameters. First is a boolean, which will represent the current state of the button. Second is a lambda, which will be called whenever the bookmark button is tapped. Third is the tint color for the button. So the first component is ripple. Its child is this toggleable function, which acts as a switch. It takes 2 parameters. First is boolean, which represents the on-off state of the toggle. Second is lambda, which is the callback function invoked whenever the toggle state changes. Inside this toggleable, we have a container of size 48 by 48 dp. Inside it, we are checking if the toggleable is on or not, according to which we are setting the vector image. If the bookmark is not on, then we have an outline vector, and if it is on, then we have a filled vector. Next, create this model here, which will store the bookmark state. Inside this model object, we have a model list of int, which will store the champion ID of the bookmark champions. Model list is an observable version of the list. Next, we have this function here, which takes in a champion ID and checks if the champion is already bookmarked or not. If it is, then it removes from the list, else it adds to the list. Last, we have this isFavorite function, which checks if the champion is bookmarked or not and returns a boolean value. We will use this function later. Now, open up the champion screen file. This will contain all the composable required to draw the champion profile screen. So go ahead and create a composable function of the name champion screen. Now if you remember, our champion screen will first have the top app bar, then the champion's content, which we already created, and at the bottom a bottom actions bar, which we will have 2 buttons, one for bookmarking and another for sharing. So first create the bottom actions bar. So leave this champion screen composable for now and create another composable below it and name it bottom actions bar as I have here. This will take a champion object as a parameter. First of all, we are getting the context it is required for the share button to work. Next, we have a surface component with an elevation of 2 dp. Then we have a container with a height of 56 dp, which wraps over the expanded modifier, which will allow the container to be stretched widthwise. Then we have the row, which places item horizontally. Then we are calling our bookmark button composable. For its parameters, we pass the current state of bookmark for the champion. Then we are passing in the function to toggle bookmark when it is tapped, and last, we are passing the tint color for the bookmark button. In our case, it is red. So the bookmark button is done. Next, for the share button, we will create another composable function. So go ahead and create another function and name it bottom actions bar. It takes 3 parameters. First is an ID for the vector drawable, second is the tint color, and third is the lambda function, which will get executed on click event. So for the UI, we have a ripple clickable container, which you are already familiar with, and finally the draw vector, which we created earlier. Next, we create a function that will create the intent for sharing. So we have this here. These are self-explanatory and you guys may already be familiar with. Okay, now we get back to the bottom actions bar, and after the bookmark button, we insert our bottom action button, which will be used for sharing. Finally, we get back to the champion screen and insert the bottom actions bar at the bottom. So that's all for the champion screen. It should look like this now. Now we need to add the navigation mechanism. So head back to the champion gram app file and add another condition here. If the screen state is changed to profile, then we are calling our champion screen composable with the respective champion ID. Next, open the home champion card file under the home directory and add this navigate to function here, so that we can navigate to the respective profile screen by clicking on the champion card from home screen. So that's all for this tutorial. You have now created an application via Compose library. You can go ahead and run the application. To catch up till this part of the tutorial, you can check out the profile branch of the GitHub repository given in the description. So that's all for this tutorial. I hope you learned something good today. Good luck and don't forget to like, subscribe and do all that good stuff. This is the Art Programmer. Peace out.